Brother, sister, let's be clear about something important before we go any further into this list. This isn't a list of people to write off. Scripture calls us clearly to love our enemies, welcome the outcast, and help the stranger. That command never gets suspended or set aside. But there's a difference between helping a person and helping a request. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse the specific thing they're asking of you, because saying yes wouldn't actually help them. It would help their sin, their deception, or their harm towards someone else keep going unchecked. Today we're naming 7 specific requests you must never say yes to, no matter who's asking or how compelling their reasons sound, however much genuine love you may feel for the person standing in front of you. This isn't about closing your heart to people or becoming suspicious of everyone who needs something from you. It's about learning the difference between genuine compassion and quiet enabling, which can look remarkably similar from the outside. Stay with me. You've probably been asked for at least one of these without realizing what you were actually being asked to help with. Think about the last time someone asked you for a favor that made you quietly uncomfortable, even if you couldn't fully articulate why in the moment. That discomfort is often worth paying attention to. It's frequently your own conscience recognizing, faster than your conscious mind can name it, that what's actually being requested isn't quite the simple, harmless favor it's being presented as. The first request you must never say yes to is helping someone lie or cover up their deception. Just tell them I was with you. Don't mention what you saw. These requests dress themselves up as loyalty or protecting someone's feelings, but agreeing makes you an active participant in the deception itself. Scripture is direct about this. A false witness is condemned, regardless of how sympathetic the reason behind the lie might seem. Genuine love for someone never requires becoming complicit in their dishonesty. Consider what actually happens once you've said yes to this kind of request. You're no longer simply a bystander to someone else's choice. You've become an active participant, with your own credibility now tied to a lie that isn't even yours. And once you've agreed to cover once, the same request tends to return again, precisely because it worked the first time and cost you nothing visible in the moment. The second request you must never say yes to is giving money that will directly fund someone's active addiction. The request often comes wrapped in genuine desperation, real tears, real crisis, rent, groceries, an emergency that somehow always seems to arise. But if you know, or strongly suspect, that the money will actually go toward feeding an addiction rather than the stated need, handing it over isn't compassion. It's participation in the exact cycle that's destroying them, dressed up as help because refusing feels unkind in the moment. This is one of the hardest distinctions to actually hold on to in real time, because the person asking is often someone you genuinely love, and their distress is often completely real, even if the specific request isn't actually going toward what they claim. Real support in this situation often looks like offering to pay a bill directly, rather than handing over cash, or connecting someone with actual recovery resources rather than simply providing the funds that keep the cycle running smoothly. The third request you must never say yes to is helping someone deceive their spouse, covering for an affair, hiding financial decisions, or providing an alibi. A friend asks you to say they were somewhere they weren't. A family member asks you to keep a secret from their spouse that directly affects that spouse's own life and trust. Whatever the specific justification offered, agreeing to this request makes you a co-conspirator in betraying a marriage covenant. Loyalty to a friend was never meant to require becoming an accomplice in harming someone else's most intimate relationship. Notice how this request often gets framed specifically to appeal to your loyalty rather than your honesty. I need you to have my back. As though refusing were a betrayal, rather than simply declining to participate in someone else's actual betrayal. A genuine friend can love someone deeply while still refusing to help them harm their spouse, and can even be the one voice willing to say the hard thing everyone else around them is too invested to say. The fourth request you must never say yes to is repeatedly bailing out a manipulator with no accountability or genuine change ever following. The first time might genuinely be a crisis. The fifth time, with the same pattern, the same excuses, the same promise that this is truly the last time, that's no longer a crisis. It's a cycle, and your continued help is quietly functioning as one of the things sustaining it. Real love sometimes requires letting natural consequences finally arrive, rather than continuing to soften every landing indefinitely. Consider what actually motivates a pattern to finally change. If every consequence gets absorbed by someone else before it ever fully lands, there's rarely any genuine incentive for the underlying behavior to shift at all. The discomfort of watching someone you love actually face a consequence you could have prevented is real, but it's often the exact discomfort that finally makes room for genuine change to begin. The fifth request you must never say yes to is helping someone plan revenge or harm against another person. Help me get back at them. They deserve to know how it feels. Scripture is unambiguous here. Vengeance belongs to God, not to us, and certainly not to whatever plan someone's currently nursing in their hurt or anger. Helping someone plot harm against another person, whatever wrong was originally done to them, only compounds injury with more injury and drags you directly into the middle of it. Consider how differently you can support someone's genuine pain without ever agreeing to help them act on the impulse toward revenge. Listening to their anger, validating that what happened to them was genuinely wrong, sitting with them in the injustice. All of this is real support. Actually helping plan or execute retaliation is something else entirely, and it rarely leaves anyone involved, including you, in a better place than before. The sixth request you must never say yes to is helping spread a scam, a predatory scheme, or false teaching to others. Just share this with your friends. You'd be helping people by getting them in on this too. Multi-level marketing schemes disguised as opportunity. Prosperity gospel content promising blessing for a price. Investment schemes promising unrealistic returns. Helping recruit others into any of these isn't networking or generosity. It's participating in harm that will eventually land on the very people you'd be recruiting. Notice how these requests often specifically leverage trust and relationship as their primary recruiting tool, precisely because a pitch from a trusted friend lands very differently than the same pitch from a stranger. That trust is exactly what makes participating in this kind of recruitment so serious. You're not simply sharing a neutral opportunity. You're lending your own credibility to something that may genuinely harm the very people who trust you enough to listen. And the seventh, maybe the hardest of all, affirming someone's unrepentant sin instead of speaking truth in love. Being asked to simply validate a decision you know is genuinely harmful. To tell someone what they want to hear rather than what's actually true. To stay silent because honesty feels risky to the relationship. Scripture calls believers to speak truth in love, not to choose between truth and love as though they were opposites. Affirming sin to preserve comfort isn't kindness. It's often simply cowardice, dressed up as tolerance. This doesn't mean every hard truth needs to be delivered bluntly or without genuine gentleness. How truth gets spoken matters enormously, and harshness isn't actually more faithful than kindness. But there's a real difference between speaking a hard truth gently and simply never speaking it at all, because silence feels safer for the relationship. Genuine friends have historically been the ones willing to risk the relationship's comfort for the sake of the other person's actual good. So what does it actually look like to say no to these 7 requests, while still genuinely loving the person asking? It looks like refusing to lie for someone while still caring about them deeply. It looks like declining to fund an addiction while still praying for their recovery. It looks like refusing to help betray a marriage while still being a genuine friend. It looks like finally allowing consequences to arrive instead of endlessly softening them. It looks like refusing to help plan revenge while still grieving alongside someone's real pain. It looks like declining to spread harm to others, however compelling the pitch. And it looks like speaking honest truth even when silence would be so much easier. None of this means becoming cold or unavailable to people who genuinely need help. It means learning to distinguish between a person and a request, so that your compassion actually serves someone's genuine good, rather than simply making their harmful pattern more comfortable to continue. Here's a simple diagnostic for each of these 7 requests, if you want somewhere concrete to start applying this. For covering deception, would you be comfortable if the person you're lying to eventually found out you knew and helped anyway? For funding addiction, are you actually meeting a genuine need, or simply removing the discomfort that might otherwise prompt real change? For helping hide an affair, would you want someone to do the same thing for your own spouse, keeping something this significant from you? For repeated bailouts, has anything actually changed since the last time you helped? Or is this simply the same request wearing a slightly different crisis? For helping plan revenge, are you actually comforting someone's pain, or actively participating in escalating it further? For spreading a scheme, would you feel comfortable if the people you recruited eventually realized exactly how this opportunity actually worked? For affirming unrepentant sin, are you staying silent because it's genuinely wise, or simply because honesty feels too risky to the relationship right now? None of these questions are meant to make you suspicious of everyone who asks for your help, or to turn every request into an interrogation before you're willing to respond. Most requests for genuine help are exactly that. Genuine, straightforward, deserving of a generous and immediate yes. These 7 categories represent a much smaller, more specific set of requests, ones that ask you to actively participate in something harmful rather than simply extend ordinary kindness. Consider how differently your relationships function over time when you're able to hold this distinction clearly, compared to when every request gets treated as equally deserving of an automatic yes. Genuine boundaries around these 7 areas don't actually weaken your relationships. They tend to strengthen them, precisely because people learn that your yes actually means something, and that your love for them was never contingent on being willing to participate in whatever they happen to be asking for in a given moment. This kind of discernment takes practice, and it's completely normal to get it wrong sometimes in either direction. Occasionally saying yes to something you later wish you'd declined, or occasionally being too cautious about a request that was actually completely reasonable. Growing in this kind of wisdom is a lifelong process, not a single lesson learned once and then perfectly applied forever after. If this stirred something in you, brother, sister, don't scroll past it. Subscribe to Biblical Warning now, and let's keep examining these hidden places together, one warning at a time.